The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, unremarkable except for its weight. Ethan Brooks held it in both hands, feeling the heft of something that wanted to change his life. No return address, no logo, just his name typed in a font that suggested lawyers and decisions made in rooms he'd never see. Inside, a cashier's check for $750,000. Below it, a single typed line: Emma's death was tragic. Harper's future doesn't have to be. Sign the NDA. Move on. Ethan set the check on the kitchen counter and stared at it the way a man might stare at a loaded gun. The number didn't feel real. 3 years of struggling, 3 years of drowning in bills and grief in the hollow space where his wife used to be. And someone thought they could paper over all of it with 6 zeros and a signature line. He picked up the attached document, 12 pages of legal language that boiled down to one thing. Take the money, shut up about Atlas Industries, and pretend Emma died of bad luck instead of corporate negligence. The apartment was quiet. Harper had already left for school, her backpack covered in patches she'd drawn herself, stars and hearts, and one lopsided cat that made Ethan smile every time he saw it. 7 years old and already more artist than he'd ever be. Already carrying Emma's eyes and smile and that thing she used to do where she'd tilt her head when she was thinking hard about something important. Already carrying a heart that didn't work right. Ethan folded the NDA and slid it back into the envelope. He didn't sign it. He didn't tear it up either. He just set it aside and made coffee, because what else do you do when someone tries to buy your silence before breakfast? The firing had happened 5 weeks ago. Not a firing, technically. Restructuring. The kind of corporate language that meant the same thing, but sounded less like what it was. Ethan had worked at Northridge Manufacturing for 6 years. Quality control analyst, good at his job. The kind of good that meant he caught things other people missed. Safety violations, corners cut, reports that didn't match reality. He'd filed 17 incident reports in his last year. 17 times he'd flagged something that could hurt someone. 17 times he'd gone through proper channels, followed procedure, done everything by the book. Then Atlas Industries bought Northridge, and suddenly doing his job correctly made him a problem worth solving. The HR director, a woman named Linda who'd smiled too much and said his name too often, had called it a difficult decision. Budget constraints, overlapping roles, nothing personal. Ethan had cleaned out his desk in 23 minutes. Coffee mug Harper had decorated, 3 years of performance reviews that didn't matter anymore, and a photo of Emma that he'd kept next to his monitor because seeing her face made the fluorescent lights and recycled air feel less like suffocation. He'd walked out of that building with a severance package that wouldn't last through summer and the certainty that sometimes doing the right thing cost you everything. Now he made coffee in an apartment that felt too small and too empty at the same time, and tried not to think about the check sitting on his counter like a test he couldn't afford to fail. The math was brutal and simple: severance, $4,200, rent $1,450, utilities, groceries, Harper's after-school program, the car payment on a vehicle that needed new brakes, student loans from a degree that had promised more than it delivered. He'd been running the numbers for weeks, rearranging them like puzzle pieces that refused to fit, and the answer was always the same. By August, they'd be drowning. By September, he'd be choosing between rent and food. By October, he didn't let himself think about October. Harper's medical bills existed in a category beyond math: congenital heart defect, stage 3. Something with a name full of Latin syllables that Ethan had learned to pronounce but couldn't make less terrifying. She needed a transplant. The surgery cost $400,000. Their insurance, the insurance he'd lost when Northridge let him go, had been fighting coverage for 8 months before the firing, citing pre-existing conditions and experimental procedures and language designed to say no in as many words as possible. The COBRA coverage he'd scraped together after losing his job cost $380 a month and covered almost nothing that mattered. Harper had maybe 6 months. 8, if they were lucky. The cardiologist had used the word urgent in a voice that suggested he'd delivered this news before and hated it every time. Ethan poured coffee into Emma's favorite mug, purple chipped on one side, still sitting in the cabinet 3 years after she'd stopped drinking from it, and forced himself to think about the check. $750,000. Harper's surgery covered, rent for years, breathing room, security, the ability to sleep without calculating how many hours of Uber driving it would take to keep the lights on. All he had to do was sign a piece of paper saying he'd never talk about why Emma died. The apartment door opened. Ethan turned, expecting Mrs. Campbell from next door with another casserole, but instead found himself looking at a woman he'd never seen before. Mid-30s, maybe 40. Dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested efficiency over style. She wore jeans and a sweater that cost more than his car payment, though she'd tried to dress it down. Expensive boots, a leather bag that had the kind of patina that came from quality, not age. She stood in his doorway like someone who'd been taught to take up space, and there was something in her eyes, storm clouds, Harper would have said, that made Ethan think of winter. "Mr. Brooks?" Her voice was careful. "I'm here about the room." Ethan had posted the listing 4 days ago. 1 bedroom, furnished, $700 a month, utilities included, quiet building, background check required. He'd gotten 3 responses, a graduate student who'd asked if he could pay in cash and seemed disappointed when Ethan said he needed documentation. A woman who'd shown up smelling like cigarettes and desperation. A guy named Trevor who'd spent the entire viewing talking about cryptocurrency. This woman, Claire Mitchell, according to the email she'd sent, had offered to pay a year up front and ask no questions about references. Ethan stepped aside. "Come in." She moved past him with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to assess spaces quickly. Her gaze traveled across the modest furniture, the stack of bills Ethan had forgotten to hide, Harper's drawings taped to the refrigerator, the crack in the living room ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix. "It's not much," Ethan said, because silence felt worse. "It's fine." She turned to face him, and something in her expression softened just slightly. "I'm not looking for much." He showed her the room. Emma's office before the headaches started, before the diagnosis that came too late, before everything that mattered turned into past tense and empty spaces. Ethan had closed the door after the funeral and pretended the room didn't exist for 2 years. Then desperation had made him open it again, clean it out, and accept that survival sometimes meant renting out pieces of grief. The room held a twin bed, a desk, a narrow closet, window overlooking the alley where the building's dumpsters lived and the neighbor's cat prowled at night. Claire walked to the window and stood there for a moment, quiet. "How much?" $700 a month, first and last up front. "I'll give you 12 months, cash, no questions." Ethan blinked. "That's $9,600. She turned to face him. "I don't want a lease. I don't want official documentation. I just need a place to stay that's quiet and private. Somewhere I can think." Every instinct Ethan had developed over 38 years of life told him this was wrong. People who paid a year's rent in cash and didn't want paperwork were running from something. People who looked like they belonged in penthouses didn't rent rooms in buildings where the elevator broke twice a month. But $9,600 was 3 months of breathing room. 3 months where he could focus on Harper instead of calculating whether they could afford milk and eggs in the same week. "You're not in trouble, are you?" Ethan heard himself ask. "With the law, I mean." "No." She said it flatly, without the defensiveness that would have made it a lie. "I'm not running from the police. I'm not dealing drugs. I'm not going to bring dangerous people to your home. I just need space to figure something out, and I prefer privacy while I do it." Ethan studied her. Something in her eyes reminded him of the way Emma had looked in those last months, like someone carrying weight that shouldn't be carried alone. "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 7. This isn't a party house." "Good. I'm not a party person. Kitchen and bathroom are shared. Clean up after yourself, no guests without permission, quiet after 10. Sounds reasonable. And if you're lying to me about the trouble part, if you bring anything into this apartment that could hurt my daughter... Claire met his eyes. I won't. I promise you that. The thing about promises was, they only mattered if you believed them. Ethan wanted to believe her. Needed to, maybe. Because $9,600 meant Harper could stay in her after-school program. Meant he could fix the brakes on the car. Meant he could sleep for the first time in weeks without waking up at 3 a.m. doing math in his head. When do you want to move in? Tomorrow. She arrived the next morning with 3 suitcases and a laptop bag. No furniture, no pictures, nothing that suggested permanence or personality. Ethan helped her carry the bags upstairs, the elevator was broken again, and watched as she unpacked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Everything had a place. Everything was organized. Within an hour, the room looked lived in but not revealing. Harper came home from school and found Claire sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop. She stopped in the doorway, backpack sliding off one shoulder, and stared with the frank curiosity of a child who hadn't learned to pretend disinterest. "You're the new person," Harper announced. Claire looked up from her screen. For a moment something crossed her face, surprise maybe, or the kind of uncertainty adults tried to hide from children, before settling into careful neutrality. "I'm Claire." "I'm Harper. That's a pretty name. Claire." She tested it out, rolling the syllables. "Are you going to live here forever?" "Harper," Ethan said from the kitchen where he was unpacking groceries. "That's not..." "For a while," Claire interrupted. Her voice had gone softer. "Is that okay with you?" Harper considered this with the seriousness she brought to important questions. "Do you like pancakes?" "I do." "Good. Daddy makes them on Sundays, but they're always kind of weird." Ethan glanced over to find Claire almost smiling. Almost. Like someone who'd forgotten how and was trying to remember. "Maybe I can help," Claire said. "I make pretty good pancakes." Harper decided then, in the way children do, that Claire was acceptable. She dropped her backpack by the door, Ethan would make her move it later, and pulled out a notebook covered in drawings. Flowers and stars and abstract shapes that suggested she'd been thinking about something other than math while the teacher talked. That first week passed in careful adjustment. Claire kept to herself, working on her laptop at odd hours, emerging for coffee and occasional meals. She was quiet without being cold, present without being intrusive. She cleaned up after herself. She respected boundaries. She existed in their space without demanding anything from it. Ethan found himself watching her sometimes, trying to figure out what she was running from. Because she was definitely running. People who paid cash and avoided documentation were always running from something. But she was also careful with Harper in a way that made Ethan think she understood what it meant to be around someone fragile. She didn't talk down to her. She listened when Harper explained her drawings. She asked questions like the answers actually mattered. By the second week, Harper had started drawing Claire. Ethan found the picture one evening while Harper was brushing her teeth. Pencil sketch. Surprisingly detailed for a 7-year-old. Claire sitting at the kitchen table, face in profile, eyes focused on something beyond the frame. Harper had titled it in her careful block letters. "The Lady Made of Ice." "She's sad," Harper said from the doorway, toothpaste still on her chin, it like Mama was before she got really sick. Ethan's chest tightened. "What makes you think that?" "Her eyes. They have storm clouds in them." Harper pointed at the drawing. "And she smiles, but it doesn't go all the way up. Like she's pretending." Ethan looked at his daughter, 7 years old and already seeing things adults tried to hide, and felt the familiar ache of loving someone so perceptive it scared him. "Maybe she just needs a friend," he said quietly. "Maybe." Harper took the drawing back, studied it. "I'm going to make her a better one, with colors, so she knows we like her." The third week, everything changed. Ethan had been using his laptop, a 6-year-old machine that wheezed through basic tasks, when Claire emerged from her room looking frustrated. "My laptop died," she said without preamble. "Completely bricked. I have a project due and I'm going to lose everything if I can't access my files." "Did you try?" "I tried everything. It's dead." She paused. "Could I use yours? I know it's an imposition, but I'm desperate." Ethan hesitated. The laptop contained the only thing that still mattered to him beyond Harper: his investigation into Atlas Industries. 3 months of late-night research, downloaded articles, financial reports, anything he could find about the company that had bought Northridge. Not for any particular reason, just anger, mostly. The need to understand who had casually destroyed his livelihood and why. But Claire was a tenant who'd paid a year up front and asked for almost nothing in return. "Yeah, sure. Just don't delete anything, okay? Thank you." She took the computer to the kitchen table. Ethan went to start dinner. He was halfway through chopping an onion when he heard her voice, sharp with something that might have been surprise or fear. "Mr. Brooks?" He turned. Claire was staring at the laptop screen, her face drained of color. "Why do you have files about Atlas Industries on your computer?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Ethan set down the knife, suddenly aware of his heartbeat. "I used to work for them, for a company they acquired. I was researching." He stopped. "Why?" Claire's hands were shaking, actually shaking, fingers trembling against the keyboard. She looked at him with something in her eyes that might have been recognition or horror or both. "What did they do to you?" "They fired me. After I reported safety violations, after I—" Ethan moved closer, trying to read her expression. "How do you know Atlas Industries?" She didn't answer, just stared at the screen like it contained something she'd been looking for and dreading in equal measure. "Claire," he made his voice firm. "Who are you?" The silence stretched. Ethan could hear the refrigerator humming, the neighbor's television through the wall, his own breathing loud in his ears. Claire's fingers moved across the keyboard, clicking through his files. Research about water contamination in a town called Ashford, articles about cancer clusters, financial reports that showed acquisitions and subsidiaries, and a corporate structure designed to obscure rather than illuminate. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I need to show you something." She disappeared into her room and returned carrying a small external hard drive, the kind that could hold terabytes of data. She plugged it into his laptop with hands that still trembled and pulled up a folder structure that made Ethan's chest tighten. Internal memos, emails, financial spreadsheets, documents that shouldn't exist outside a corporate server, stamped with classifications like confidential and attorney-client privileged. "Where did you get these?" "My father." She clicked through folders, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Richard Sterling. He's the CEO of Atlas Industries." The world tilted. Ethan grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "You're his daughter?" "Yes." Claire pulled up an email chain, dates going back 5 years. "He keeps backups of everything on a private server at the house. I've had administrative access since I was 16. He wanted me to learn the business, understand how empires are built." She scrolled through the emails, names Ethan didn't recognize, discussing things that made his stomach turn. Cost-benefit analyses that treated human lives as acceptable losses. Plans to contaminate municipal water supplies in 7 cities because buying devalued property was cheaper than proper waste disposal. "Ashford was the first," Claire said quietly. 2019. 3 people died. 47 got sick. My father's company settled for $15 million and made everyone sign NDAs. She pulled up another file. "Then they did it again and again, 7 cities total. Different subsidiaries, same strategy." Ethan couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the screen and the evidence of systematic murder dressed up as business strategy. "Your wife," Claire said, and her voice cracked. "When did she get sick?" November 2021. The words came out automatically. Brain cancer, stage 4 by the time they caught it. Claire pulled up a timeline. Atlas acquisition of the local water treatment plant, March 2020. 18 months before Emma's diagnosis. 18 months of drinking water that someone had decided was acceptable to poison. I don't have names, Claire whispered. I don't have a list of victims, but the timeline matches. The chemical signature matches. If your wife got sick 18 months after Atlas took over the water plant. Ethan's hand shot out and slammed the laptop closed. The sound echoed in the small kitchen like a gunshot. Harper's voice came from her bedroom doorway. Daddy? Are you okay? He turned to find his daughter standing there in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with the fear children get when they see adults come apart. Ethan forced his face into something that might pass for calm. Yeah, baby, just surprised by something. Go brush your teeth, okay? Are you mad at Ms. Claire? No, not mad. Just talking about grown-up things. It's fine. Harper didn't look convinced, but she retreated to the bathroom. Ethan listened to the water running, the sound of her humming while she brushed, the ordinary sounds of a child who didn't know yet that the world was full of people who'd kill her mother for a profit margin. He looked at Claire. She was crying, silent tears tracking down her face while she stared at the closed laptop. How long have you known? His voice was flat, dead. 6 months. I found the files by accident. I was looking for something else and She wiped her eyes roughly. I spent 6 months trying to verify it, hoping I was wrong, hoping my father wasn't. Her voice broke. I wasn't wrong. And you came here because I traced the Ashford investigation and found names of people who'd worked for Atlas subsidiaries. People who might have questions. Your name came up in an employee database. When I saw you had a room to rent, she looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. I thought maybe I could learn something. See if you knew anything. I didn't expect. You didn't expect what? To like you. She said it simply, like a confession. I didn't expect Harper to be so sweet. I didn't expect this to feel like a home. Ethan wanted to rage, wanted to put his fist through the wall. Wanted to scream until his throat bled and the world made sense again. But Harper was 20 feet away, brushing her teeth, and he'd learned 3 years ago that grief had to be quiet when there was a child in the house. He sat down hard in the chair across from Claire. Emma didn't just die, he said, hearing his voice come out strange and distant. Someone killed her. Someone looked at a spreadsheet and decided her life was worth less than the cost of proper waste disposal. Yes. 43 people, you said 43. At least, that we know of. The real number is probably higher. Ethan thought about Emma in those last months. The headaches that wouldn't stop. The seizures that came out of nowhere. The terror in her eyes when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do. She died in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and failure, holding his hand, trying to tell him it was okay even though they both knew it wasn't. She died thinking it was just bad luck, just cells that turned against themselves for no reason. She died never knowing that someone had chosen this for her. The rage hit him then, pure and clean and absolute. Ethan stood up so fast the chair fell backward. His hand swept across the counter, sending the morning's coffee mug flying. It shattered against the wall. Not Emma's purple one, thank God, just one of the cheap ones from the grocery store. And Harper's voice called out from the bathroom. Daddy? It's okay, baby. He forced the words out through a throat that wanted to scream. Just clumsy, everything's fine. He pressed his palms against the counter and tried to breathe. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The technique his grief counselor had taught him back when he thought counseling might help with the kind of pain that had no bottom. Claire hadn't moved. I'm sorry, I should have told you differently, Stop. Ethan straightened, turned to face her. Just stop. Harper appeared in the doorway, toothbrush in hand. Did something break? Yeah, I dropped a mug. I'll clean it up. Ethan crossed to her, knelt down so they were eye level. Time for bed, okay? Are you sad about Mama? The question hit him in the chest. Harper asked it sometimes, usually when she saw him staring at nothing or found him sitting in the dark after she'd gone to sleep. She asked it with the careful voice of a child who'd learned that grief was a permanent resident in their home. Yeah, he said honestly, but that's okay. It's okay to be sad sometimes. Is Miss Claire sad too? Ethan glanced back. Claire was wiping her eyes again, trying to compose herself. Yeah, I think she is. Harper considered this. Then she walked past Ethan into the kitchen and stood in front of Claire's chair. When I'm sad, Daddy gives me hugs, she announced. Do you want a hug? Claire looked at Harper like she'd been offered something holy. I don't want to. You don't have to. Harper didn't wait for permission. She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Claire's waist, her head barely reaching the woman's chest. For a moment, Claire didn't move. Then her hands came up, hesitant, and settled on Harper's back. She closed her eyes and something in her face crumbled. Thank you, she whispered. Harper pulled back and patted Claire's arm. It's okay. Everybody needs hugs sometimes, even ice ladies. Then she headed to her room like she'd just solved all the world's problems with 7-year-old wisdom. Ethan and Claire sat in silence after Harper's door closed, the broken mug still scattered across the floor, the laptop sitting between them like evidence of something neither wanted to fully acknowledge. Finally, Claire spoke. What are you going to do? I don't know. Ethan looked at his hands. What are you going to do? I came here to find allies, to figure out how to use what I have without getting myself killed or disappeared into some psychiatric facility where concerned fathers send daughters who know too much. She met his eyes. I think I found more than that. You found a widower with a sick kid and a grudge. I found someone who deserves the truth, someone whose wife deserves justice. She paused. Someone brave enough to stand up to a $40 billion corporation. I'm not brave. I'm just angry. Anger and bravery look the same from the outside. Ethan wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, settled for rubbing his face with both hands and trying to figure out what happened now. The answer arrived the next morning in the form of another envelope. This one was lighter, cheaper paper, delivered by someone who'd shoved it under the door while Ethan slept. He found it when he woke up at 6, padding to the kitchen in his pajamas, still half in a dream where Emma was alive and none of this had happened. Inside was a phone, new, expensive, already powered on, and a note in the same typed font as the first letter. For when you're ready to talk, we can help each other. The phone buzzed. A text message appeared on the screen. Check your bank account. Ethan's hands went cold. He pulled out his own phone and logged into his banking app with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. The page loaded. His checking account balance glowed at him from the screen. Yesterday, $847. Today, $50,847. Another text arrived. This is just a deposit. Full payment when we reach an understanding. Think about Harper. Ethan stared at the numbers until they stopped looking like numbers and started looking like threats dressed up as generosity. Someone had put $50,000 in his account. Someone who knew his banking information. Someone who knew about Harper. Someone who was telling him exactly how easily they could make problems disappear. He was still standing there, frozen, when Claire emerged from her room. She took one look at his face and the phone in his hand. What happened? He showed her. The texts, the bank account, the new phone sitting on the counter like a snake coiled and ready to strike. Claire's jaw tightened. They're paying you off. $50,000. Ethan heard his voice come out flat. With more promised if I sign their NDA and walk away. Are you going to? It was the question that mattered. The only question, really. $50,000 would keep them afloat for 6 months. Maybe longer if he was careful. It was breathing room, security, The ability to focus on Harper instead of drowning in bills. All he had to do was pretend Emma died of bad luck and keep his mouth shut about the people who'd killed her. Ethan looked at the phone, at the numbers in his bank account, at Claire standing in his kitchen with evidence of systematic murder on a hard drive and the weight of knowing in her eyes. He thought about Harper asking if he was sad about Mama, about the drawing she'd made titled The Lady Maid of Ice, about the way she'd hugged Claire last night and said everybody needs hugs sometimes. He thought about what he wanted to teach his daughter, what kind of man she needed him to be. The answer came easier than it should have. Ethan picked up the new phone, walked to the kitchen sink and dropped it in. Then he turned on the water and watched it die. "Mr. Brooks." "Ethan." He turned to face Claire. "If we're going to do this, you should use my first name." "Do what?" "Whatever comes next." He pulled out his own phone and started typing. "I'm contacting a journalist, someone I've followed for years, someone who might actually care about this. They'll come after you. They'll come after Harper." "They already did." Ethan gestured at the drowned phone. "They put money in my account without permission. They know where I live. They know about my daughter, which means doing nothing isn't safety, it's just surrender." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and certain. "Sarah Thompson, investigative journalist, ProPublica. She's done exposés on corporate malfeasance before. She's the one who brought down those senators last year. I know her work." Ethan finished typing the email. Subject line: "Evidence of systematic corporate negligence resulting in 43 deaths." He attached 3 files from Claire's hard drive, enough to prove legitimacy without revealing everything. His finger hovered over the send button. "Last chance to back out," Claire said quietly. "Once you hit send, there's no taking it back. They'll know we're serious. They'll escalate." Ethan thought about the check he'd burned yesterday morning, the $750,000 that could have solved every problem except the one that mattered most: living with himself. He thought about Emma, who'd died thinking the universe was just cruel, who'd never known that someone chose this, who deserved better than a husband who sold her memory for money. "My daughter needs to know her father is a man of integrity," he said. "I can't teach her that if I sell my soul for money." He hit send. The email vanished into the digital void. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Claire's phone buzzed. She checked it and her face went pale. "What?" "My father. He knows I accessed the server files. His security team is coming." "How soon?" "Now." The apartment buzzer rang, harsh and insistent. Ethan's heart kicked into overdrive. "Mr. Brooks," a voice came through the intercom. Professional, calm, dangerous. "We need to speak with you about Claire Sterling. Please let us in." Ethan pressed the button. "Who is this?" "Atlas Industries Corporate Security. We're here to help Miss Sterling. Her father is very concerned about her mental state. If you could just—" "No." Ethan released the button. The buzzer rang again, longer this time. Angry. Claire was already moving, grabbing her laptop, the hard drive, shoving them into her bag. "They'll have someone watching the back exit. Fire escape too, probably." "How many people does your father have?" "Enough." She met his eyes. "I'm sorry, I should have known he'd track the server access. I should have been more careful." Harper's bedroom door opened. She stood in the doorway, clutching her rabbit, eyes wide. "Daddy, who's at the door?" The buzzer became pounding, fists on wood, a voice shouting about having legal authority and cooperation being in everyone's best interest. Ethan crossed to Harper, knelt down, made his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "Baby, I need you to go to your room and lock the door. Don't come out until I say it's okay." "Are they bad men?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. And whatever happens, I need you to stay in your room. Can you do that for me?" Harper looked at Claire, then back at Ethan. "Is Ms. Claire in trouble?" "Maybe, but Daddy's going to help her." "Because she's our friend now?" "Yeah, because she's our friend." Harper nodded and ran to her room. Ethan heard the lock click. He turned to Claire. "How do you want to do this?" They'll be polite at first, professional. They'll say they're here to help me, that my father is worried, that they just want to make sure I'm safe. She paused. And if I refuse to go with them, they'll get less polite very quickly. Then we don't open the door. They'll break it down eventually. The pounding intensified. Ethan made a decision. He walked to the door and yanked it open. 3 men in suits stood in the hallway, not quite corporate, not quite security, something in between that suggested they were very good at making problems disappear. The one in front had the kind of smile that never touched his eyes. "Mr. Brooks, thank you for opening the door. We're here about Claire Sterling. Is she inside?" "Why?" "Her father filed a missing person report. He's concerned for her welfare. We're just here to verify she's safe and see if she needs any assistance." "She's fine. She's here by choice. We'd like to confirm that with her directly, if you don't mind." Claire appeared behind Ethan. The men's attention shifted to her like predators locking onto prey. "Miss Sterling, your father is very worried about you." "I'm 23 years old," Claire said, her voice steady despite the fear Ethan could see in her eyes. "I'm here by choice. You can tell my father I'm fine and I'll contact him when I'm ready." The smile on the lead agent's face didn't waver. "Your father has expressed concern about your mental state. He believes you may be in crisis and need professional help." "I'm not in crisis. I'm clear-headed, rational, and making my own decisions. With all due respect, Miss Sterling, people in crisis often don't recognize they're in crisis. Your father just wants to talk. We can arrange a meeting in a neutral location. Just the 2 of you, no pressure." "I'm not interested. He's your father. He loves you." "He's a murderer," Claire said quietly, "and I have proof." The temperature in the hallway dropped. The men exchanged glances. The lead agent's smile finally died. "That's a very serious accusation. It's a very serious crime. Do you have evidence to support this claim?" Claire gestured at her bag. "About 70 gigabytes of it." The agent's eyes flicked to the bag, then back to Claire's face. When he smiled again, it was the most terrifying thing Ethan had ever seen. Professional, amused, like someone who'd heard this before and knew exactly how to make it go away. "Officers," he said, turning to the 2 men behind him, "I think this confirms Mr. Sterling's concerns about his daughter's mental state. She's clearly experiencing some kind of delusional episode. For her own safety—" "See, I'm not delusional," Claire interrupted. "And if you try to take me against my will, I'll start screaming every detail I know about Atlas Industries' criminal activity right here, right now, in front of witnesses. I'll make sure everyone in this building hears me." The agent studied her, calculating, threat assessing. "Miss Sterling, you're clearly upset. Why don't we all take a breath and—" "Ethan," Claire said, not taking her eyes off the men. "Remember when I said everyone has a price or a weakness or something to lose? Yeah, I was wrong. Some people are willing to lose everything if it means stopping people like my father." She looked at Ethan. "Are you one of those people?" It was a question and a challenge and a plea all at once. Ethan looked at the 3 men standing in his hallway representing a corporation with unlimited resources and absolutely no conscience. He looked at Claire, who'd chosen truth over comfort and was about to pay for it. He thought about Harper in her locked room, about Emma in her grave, about the choice between safety and justice that defined every meaningful moment in a person's life. He stepped in front of Claire. "Yeah," he said, "I am." The lead agent's expression shifted, calculation replaced by something harder. "Mr. Brooks, you seem like a smart man, smart enough to understand that this isn't your fight. You have a daughter to think about, a life to rebuild. We could help with that. Get out of my home. All we're asking is that you encourage Miss Sterling to have a conversation with her father. Just talk. That's all." "I said get out." The agent straightened his suit jacket. "The offer stands for 24 hours. After that, things get complicated." He glanced past Ethan into the apartment. Nice place. Would be a shame if Child Protective Services had concerns about Harper's living situation. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Every muscle in his body screamed to swing, to connect, to make this man hurt the way he was hurting. But Harper was 20 feet away behind a locked door, and violence in front of witnesses was exactly what they wanted. "You threaten my daughter again, we're done being polite." The agent smiled. "We're always polite, Mr. Brooks. It's one of our strengths." They left. Ethan closed the door and threw the deadbolt hard enough to make the frame shake. He stood there breathing hard, hands still trembling with adrenaline, while Claire sagged against the wall. "That was stupid," she whispered. "That was so incredibly stupid. Now they know we're serious and they're going to come at us with everything." They were always going to come at us with everything. Ethan's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, saw Sarah Thompson's name on the screen. The email response had arrived in 47 minutes. "Interesting claims. Need proof before we proceed. Can you provide sample documentation? Redact sensitive personal information, but include enough detail to verify authenticity." Ethan showed Claire. She was already moving, pulling up files on her laptop, selecting documents that would prove they were legitimate without revealing everything. An internal memo from Richard Sterling approving a waste disposal optimization plan. An email chain discussing settlement amounts for Ashford victims. A chemical analysis report that had been deliberately falsified before submission to the EPA. "This is 5% of what we have," she typed. "The rest comes with guarantees." Send. Harper's door opened. She stood in the hallway clutching her rabbit, trying to look brave and failing. "Are the bad men gone?" Ethan crossed to her in 3 steps and pulled her into his arms. She was shaking. His 7-year-old daughter, who'd already lost her mother and carried a broken heart, was shaking because men in suits had come to their home with threats disguised as concern. "Yeah, baby, they're gone." "Are they coming back?" He wanted to lie, wanted to tell her everything would be fine and the world was safe and bad people always lost in the end, but Harper deserved better than comfortable lies. "Maybe, but if they do, we'll be ready." She pulled back and looked at him with Emma's eyes. "Are we fighting bad guys, Daddy?" "Yeah, we are. Like superheroes?" "Something like that." Harper considered this with the gravity of someone making an important decision. "Then you can't give up. Bad guys win when good guys give up." The words hit Ethan in the chest, 7 years old and already understanding what it took some people a lifetime to learn. "You're right. We can't give up." He kissed her forehead. "But you still need to go to school and do your homework and be a kid, okay? Let the adults handle the bad guy stuff." "Okay." She hugged him once more, then looked past him at Claire. "Miss Claire, are you scared?" Claire's voice came out rough. "Yeah, I am." "That's okay. Daddy says being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. Your daddy's a smart man." Harper smiled, gap-toothed and bright despite everything, and went back to her room to get ready for school. Ethan made breakfast while Claire monitored her email. Eggs and toast because anything more complicated felt impossible. His hands were still shaking. The adrenaline crash was coming. He could feel it building behind his sternum. But he had to get Harper to school and figure out what happened next before he could afford to fall apart. Sarah Thompson responded while Harper was eating. 3 words. "Meet me. Today." They arranged it for 2 p.m. at the main library downtown. Public location, security cameras, multiple exits. Somewhere Atlas couldn't make them disappear without drawing attention. Ethan walked Harper to the bus stop. Mrs. Campbell was already there with her grandson, a chatty 5-year-old named Ryan, who immediately started telling Harper about the frog he'd found in his backyard. The normalcy of it, children talking about frogs while waiting for the school bus on a Thursday morning, felt surreal. "Everything okay, Ethan?" Mrs. Campbell kept her voice low. "I heard shouting in the hallway this morning. Just some people looking for Claire. Nothing to worry about." She gave him a look that suggested she knew exactly how much nothing it was. "You need anything, you let me know. Ryan's cousin is a lawyer. Good one, too. Thanks. I'll keep that in mind. The bus arrived. Harper hugged him extra tight before climbing aboard. Love you, Daddy. Love you more, baby girl. He watched the bus pull away and felt the weight of what he was risking settle on his shoulders like concrete. If this went wrong, if Atlas decided Harper was leverage worth using, if the system failed the way systems always failed people without money or power. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Brooks, a woman's voice, professional and careful. My name is Agent Rachel Hayes with the FBI. I'm calling regarding the Atlas Industries investigation. Ethan's heart rate spiked. What investigation? We've been monitoring Atlas for 18 months. Financial irregularities, environmental violations, potential RICO charges. We'd like to interview you and Miss Sterling regarding your knowledge of the company's activities. How do I know this is real? How do I know you're actually FBI and not someone Atlas hired? There was a pause. When Hayes spoke again, there was something that might have been approval in her voice. Smart question. Call the FBI field office main number. It's public record. Ask for Agent Rachel Hayes in white-collar crime. They'll transfer you to me and you'll know the call is legitimate. What do you want from us? Information, evidence, testimony, and in exchange we can offer protection, witness security if needed. She paused. This is voluntary at this point, but we strongly encourage your cooperation. What you know could be the difference between a case that stalls and one that puts dangerous people in prison. Ethan thought about the hard drive full of evidence, about Claire's access to Richard Sterling's private server, about 43 people who died because a corporation decided their lives were worth less than proper waste disposal. I need to talk to someone first. Can I call you back? You have my number now. Don't wait too long, Mr. Brooks. People who threaten Atlas Industries have a way of becoming unavailable. She hung up. Ethan stood on the sidewalk trying to process what had just happened. The FBI was investigating Atlas. They wanted to talk. They could offer protection, or it was a trap, another way for Atlas to figure out what they knew and how to neutralize it. He went back to the apartment. Claire was pacing the living room, laptop open, phone in hand, looking like someone on the edge of breaking. FBI just called. Agent named Rachel Hayes. Says they've been investigating Atlas for 18 months. Claire stopped pacing. Did you verify? Not yet. She gave me instructions on how to confirm she's legitimate. Ethan pulled up the FBI field office number on his phone. Question is whether we trust them. We don't have a lot of options. Your journalist meeting is in 4 hours. My father knows I accessed the server files. They're going to escalate. Then we verify and we decide. Ethan dialed the main number, asked for Agent Hayes, got transferred. The same voice answered. This is Hayes. It's Ethan Brooks. I'm verifying you're actually FBI. Smart. When can we meet? We already have a meeting scheduled with a journalist this afternoon. After that, maybe. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Sarah Thompson. ProPublica. Good choice. She's thorough. But she can't offer you protection, Mr. Brooks. She can tell your story. We can keep you alive while she does it. The bluntness of it hit hard. How much do you know about what Atlas did? Enough to want them in prison, not enough to guarantee it happens. Her voice softened slightly. Look, I can't force you to cooperate, but I've been working financial crimes for 12 years. I've seen corporations bury people who threatened them, sometimes literally. If you're going up against Richard Sterling with nothing but evidence and righteous anger, you're going to lose. And if we cooperate with you, then you have the full weight of the federal government behind you, which doesn't guarantee victory, but it improves your odds considerably. Ethan looked at Claire. She nodded once. We'll meet you, after the journalist, tomorrow morning maybe. I'll make the arrangements. And Mr. Brooks, watch your back. Atlas Security is very good at what they do. The line went dead. Ethan and Claire spent the next 3 hours preparing, going through files, selecting evidence, building a narrative that would make sense to someone who didn't already know the story. They worked in tense silence, both aware that they were building a case that could either save lives or get them killed. At 1:30, they took the bus downtown. Ethan insisted on public transportation. His car would have been too easy to follow, too easy to trap. The bus was crowded with the usual mix of students and shift workers and people just trying to get from one place to another without thinking about corporate murder. The main library was a granite fortress that looked like it had been built to withstand sieges. Wide steps, columns, architectural gravitas that suggested knowledge was worth protecting. Ethan had brought Harper here dozens of times for story hour and the free Wi-Fi. It had always felt like sanctuary. Today it felt like a battlefield. They arrived 20 minutes early and scoped out the second-floor reading room. Long tables, comfortable chairs, walls lined with reference books. Security camera in the corner with clear sightlines. A dozen people scattered throughout the space, reading or working on laptops or just existing in the quiet. Sarah Thompson arrived at 2:15. Mid-40s, graying hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wore jeans and a worn leather jacket, carried a satchel that looked like it had seen better days and better places. She sat down across from them without preamble. "You have 10 minutes to convince me this is worth my time." Claire slid an encrypted drive across the table. "Everything I told you in the email is true. Atlas Industries has systematically contaminated municipal water supplies in 7 cities. The contamination was deliberate. They wanted to devalue property for acquisition. At least 43 people died." Sarah picked up the drive. "This could be fabricated. You're the CEO's daughter. You have access to company letterhead, email systems. Why would I fabricate a scandal that destroys my family? To hurt your father, to get attention, to cash in on a tell-all book deal." Sarah's expression was flat. "I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen every angle. Give me a reason to believe you're different." Claire leaned forward. "I'm risking everything to give you this story. My family, my inheritance, probably my freedom. If I wanted attention or money, there are easier ways." "So why are you doing it?" "Because 43 people are dead. Because my father ordered their deaths as casually as you'd order coffee." Claire's voice cracked slightly. "Because someone has to stop him." Sarah studied her with the intensity of someone who'd spent a career learning to separate truth from performance. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she pulled out a recording device. "I need to ask you questions, on the record. If your story checks out, if the documents are authentic, I'll run it." She paused. "But you need to understand what that means. Once this is public, there's no taking it back. Your life as you know it is over." "My life as I know it is already over," Claire said quietly. "I've been running for months, living in fear, watching over my shoulder. At least this way, when it ends, it'll mean something." Sarah hit record. The interview lasted 45 minutes. Questions with surgical precision. Who, what, when, where, how do you know? Can you prove it? Who else has seen this? Why should anyone believe you? Claire answered each one calmly, methodically, even as her hands shook on the table. Ethan watched the room, watched the other patrons, watched for any sign that Atlas had found them. Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. 2 men entered from opposite doors. Business casual, controlled movements, scanning the room with practiced efficiency. Not the same men from this morning, but the same type. One of them made eye contact with Ethan and something shifted in the air. "We've got company," he said quietly. Claire and Sarah looked up. The 2 men were walking toward them now, not rushing, but purposeful. Sarah's hand went to her phone. "Are they yours?" "Atlas Security," Claire confirmed. Sarah opened her camera app and hit record, angling it to capture both men. "Gentlemen," she said loudly enough to draw attention. "I'm Sarah Thompson with ProPublica Investigative Journalism. Are you here in an official capacity?" The men stopped. One of them produced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're here to escort Miss Sterling home. Her father is worried about her. She's an adult. She doesn't need escorting. Nevertheless, Mr. Sterling has asked us to ensure his daughter's safety." I'm recording this, Sarah said, making sure the phone captured both faces. I'm a credentialed journalist conducting an interview with a willing source. If you interfere with that, you're interfering with freedom of the press. The smile evaporated. Ma'am, this is a family matter. It doesn't concern you. Actually, it concerns every citizen who drinks tap water. Your employer has been poisoning municipal water supplies for profit. That's a story that concerns everyone. The words hung in the air like a detonation. Around the reading room, people looked up from their books. Someone else pulled out a phone, started filming. The second man spoke for the first time. That's a serious accusation. I hope you have evidence to support it. I do, Sarah said. Hours of it, on the record, with documentation. Then we look forward to seeing your retraction when it falls apart. Claire stood up. Her voice carried across the quiet room. My name is Claire Sterling. My father is Richard Sterling, CEO of Atlas Industries, and he's a murderer. The silence was absolute. I have proof, Claire continued, louder now. Internal memos, email chains, chemical analyses, everything. My father's company deliberately poisoned the water supply in 7 American cities. They contaminated it with industrial waste to force property devaluation so they could buy land cheap. 43 people died. Hundreds more got sick. Miss Sterling, you're clearly unwell. I have documentation. Claire pulled her laptop from her bag, opened it, turned the screen so everyone could see. Files, emails, reports, evidence in neat folders with damning titles. My father approved every decision that made this happen. The first agent moved toward the laptop. Ethan stepped between them. Don't. Mr. Brooks, there are cameras, witnesses. You grab that laptop and you're committing assault in front of a room full of people. The agent's hand hovered in the air. Around them, more phones appeared. A librarian was already on her phone, probably calling security. Ethan Brooks, the agent said, recognition flashing in his eyes. Former Northridge employee. Wife died of cancer 2 years ago. You lost your job. You're desperate. He turned to address the growing audience. Miss Sterling is paying this man to support her delusions. Ethan felt something crack open inside him. Rage and grief and a terrible crystallizing clarity. My wife didn't die of cancer, he heard himself say, voice carrying across the room with absolute conviction. She was poisoned by contaminated water that Atlas Industries deliberately allowed into the municipal supply. Emma Brooks, age 34, died after 11 months of suffering because your employer decided her life was worth less than a quarterly profit margin. Someone in the crowd gasped. More phones came out. The librarian appeared with 2 security guards. You can't prove that, the agent said, but his professional composure was cracking. Actually, Sarah interjected, they can. I've reviewed the documentation. Chemical signatures match, timeline matches. There are at least 42 other cases just like Emma Brooks's. She checked her watch. And it's all going to be in my article, which goes live in approximately 3 hours. The 2 agents looked at each other. Silent communication passed between them. Then the first one pulled out his phone and made a call, turning away and speaking in tones too low to hear. The reading room had transformed. What had been a quiet sanctuary of study was now something else entirely. A stage where truth and power were colliding in real time, with witnesses recording every moment. The agent finished his call. When he turned back, his expression was grim. Mr. Sterling would like to speak with his daughter in person. He's on his way here now. No, Claire said flatly. He's your father. He deserves the chance to respond to these accusations. He had a chance to respond by not committing mass murder. He chose differently. Claire, please think about what you're doing. Your family, your future, everything you're throwing away. I'm thinking about the 43 people who don't have a future because of my family. Claire's voice was steady despite the tears tracking down her face. I'm thinking about all the children who lost parents, all the parents who lost children. I'm thinking about Harper Brooks growing up without a mother. That's what I'm thinking about. The man opened his mouth to respond, but the librarian had arrived with security guards and a very stern expression. "Gentlemen, unless you're here to use library resources, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disturbing our patrons. We're here on private business. You're here making a scene. Either conduct yourselves appropriately or leave the premises." One of the security guards, a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd dealt with far worse than corporate thugs, put her hand on her radio. "Should I call the police?" The agents exchanged another glance. Then they retreated toward the door. "This isn't over," the first one said. "Actually," Sarah said, still recording, "I think it is. You just threatened a journalist and her sources in front of a dozen witnesses while we were discussing your employer's crimes. That's going in the article, too." They left. The reading room erupted in murmurs, people clustering together, checking their phones, undoubtedly posting about what they'd just witnessed. Sarah lowered her phone and looked at Claire with something that might have been respect. "Well, that was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed. Possibly both." "Did you get it all?" "Every second, including your confession, which makes you a named source. You understand you can't take that back, right?" "I don't want to take it back." Sarah nodded and started packing up her equipment with quick, efficient movements. "Okay, here's what happens now. I'm going back to my office to verify everything on this drive. If it checks out, and based on what I just saw, it will. I'm publishing tonight. Full story, names, documents, everything. It's going to explode." "Good. But you need protection, both of you." Sarah pulled out a business card and scribbled on the back. "Michael Parker, defense attorney, specializes in whistleblower cases. Tell him I sent you." She handed the card to Claire, then gathered the rest of her things. "I have to go. I need to get this verified and published before Atlas figures out how to stop me." She paused at the edge of the table. "For what it's worth, your mother would be proud of you." Claire's face crumpled for just a second before she controlled it. "My mother's been dead for 6 years. "Then she's been proud of you for 6 years. Take care of yourself, Claire Sterling. The fight's just beginning." Sarah left. Ethan and Claire sat in the reading room while people stared and whispered and undoubtedly shared videos that were already going viral. The librarian approached cautiously. "Are you two all right? Do you need me to call the police?" "No," Ethan said. "Thank you, but we're okay." "That thing you said about the water, is it true?" Ethan looked at her. Tired eyes, careful expression. Someone who'd probably lived in this city long enough to have drunk from the same contaminated taps. "Yeah, it's true." She nodded slowly. "Then I hope you get them. Whoever did that, I hope they pay." "So do we." They left the library, walking fast but not running, aware that Atlas security was probably watching from somewhere nearby. Ethan kept one hand in his pocket wrapped around his phone, ready to call 911 if anyone tried to grab them. They made it 3 blocks before they saw the car. Black SUV with tinted windows pulling up beside them at a red light. The back door opened and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. Not security. Someone older, more polished, more dangerous. Richard Sterling looked exactly like his photos. Silver hair, strong jaw, the kind of face that inspired confidence in boardrooms and won political favors. He looked at his daughter with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. "Claire, get in the car, we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. I'm your father. You're a murderer." Richard's jaw tightened. "You've made some very serious accusations in a very public forum. Accusations that aren't true. Now get in the car before you embarrass yourself further." "They are true and you know it." Claire pulled her phone from her pocket. "I have the files, the memos with your signature, the emails you sent, the reports you falsified, everything. Files can be faked, emails can be spoofed. You're a troubled young woman who's had a difficult few years. Sarah Thompson doesn't think so. She's publishing the story tonight." For the first time, Richard's composure slipped, just for a second, but it was enough. "You gave the files to a journalist?" "I gave them to everyone. Journalists, lawyers, activists. By tomorrow morning, the whole world is going to know what you did." Richard stepped closer. Ethan moved between them instinctively. Richard looked at him like he was something unpleasant that had appeared on his shoe. "Mr. Brooks, you're making a mistake. My daughter is using you. When this all falls apart, when she recants and admits she fabricated everything, you'll be left holding the bag." "Don't," Ethan said quietly. "Don't say another word about my daughter. I'm simply pointing out that you have responsibilities. A child who depends on you, and you're throwing it all away to support my daughter's fantasies. They're not fantasies. You killed my wife." Richard smiled, and it was the coldest thing Ethan had ever seen. "Soon, killed your wife? With what? A spreadsheet?" He stepped closer, voice dropping. "You can't prove causation between water quality and cancer, Mr. Brooks. You can't prove intent. You can't prove anything except that your wife got sick and died, which happens to thousands of people every year for reasons that have nothing to do with my company. The chemical signatures match. Correlation isn't causation. The timeline matches. Coincidence. 43 people in 7 cities. Will all be explained away by my lawyers as tragic but unrelated incidents." Richard's voice was smooth, practiced. "I have attorneys who will tie this up in court for decades. I have PR firms that will make your wife look like she had pre-existing conditions and poor lifestyle choices. I have politicians who owe me favors and judges who appreciate campaign contributions." He leaned in close enough that Ethan could smell expensive cologne. "By the time I'm done, you'll be the villain and I'll be the victim of a troubled daughter's fantasies. Your wife will be a footnote in a case that never sees trial. And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if fighting was worth losing everything." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Every muscle screamed to swing, to connect, to make this man hurt. But Harper's voice echoed in his head. "Bad guys win when good guys give up." "Maybe," Ethan forced out through a throat tight with rage. "Or maybe you're underestimating how angry people get when they find out they've been poisoned for profit." Richard stepped back toward the SUV. "Last chance, Claire. Get in the car, come home. We'll fix this together. I'll get you help. We'll make this right. The only thing that makes this right is you in prison." "Then you've made your choice." Richard got into the vehicle, paused before closing the door. "I hope you're ready for the consequences." The SUV pulled away, leaving them standing on a downtown sidewalk while the world continued its oblivious rotation. Claire was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders and guided her to a nearby bench. "That was him," she whispered. "That was my father, and he doesn't care. He looked me in the eyes, and he doesn't even care. I know. All those people, all those deaths. And it's just business to him. Just numbers." Ethan held her while she sobbed against his shoulder. Around them, the city carried on. People hurrying to appointments, students heading to class, delivery trucks double-parked with hazards flashing. Normal life continuing while they sat on a bench processing the fact that evil could wear a nice suit and speak in calm tones. His phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He answered warily. "Mr. Brooks, this is Agent Hayes. I just got word that Richard Sterling confronted you and Miss Sterling in public. Are you safe?" "For now. We need to move up our meeting. Tomorrow's too late. Atlas is going to escalate tonight after Sarah Thompson's article drops. Can you come to the federal building? We'll have security, safe interview rooms, protection while we talk." Ethan looked at Claire, still crying, finally letting herself feel the weight of what she'd just done. "Give us an hour. We need to regroup first." 1 hour. Then I'm sending agents to pick you up whether you're ready or not. People who threaten Richard Sterling have a tendency to disappear." The call ended. Ethan held Claire and watched the street and tried to figure out how they were going to survive what came next. Sarah Thompson's article went live at 7:43 p.m. Ethan and Claire were back at the apartment, having picked up Harper from Mrs. Campbell's with promises to explain everything later. They sat on the couch with Ethan's laptop open, refreshing the ProPublica homepage obsessively. Then it appeared. Top story, banner headline. Atlas Industries CEO ordered systematic water contamination that killed dozens. Internal documents reveal deliberate poisoning scheme. The article was everything Sarah had promised. Meticulous, detailed, devastating. She'd laid out the evidence piece by piece, building a case that was impossible to deny. The memos with Richard Sterling's signature, the email chains discussing which cities were optimal targets, the falsified EPA reports, the settlement agreements with ND as attached. The chemical analyses showing exact matches between Atlas's industrial waste and contaminants found in 7 municipal water systems. And she'd named names. Not just Richard Sterling, but the executives who'd implemented the plan, the scientists who'd falsified data, the lawyers who'd crafted the settlements. The response was immediate and explosive. Within 20 minutes, the story had been picked up by major networks. Within an hour, it was trending on every social media platform. By 8 p.m., there were protesters gathering outside Atlas Industries headquarters with signs reading "Corporate Murderers and Justice for the Victims." Ethan watched the news coverage on his phone. Images of angry crowds and shocked anchors and Atlas's stock price plummeting in real time. "It's working," Claire whispered. "People are listening." "People are angry," Ethan corrected. "That's not the same thing as justice." His phone rang. Agent Hayes. "Have you seen the article? We're watching the coverage now." "Then you know this is about to get very ugly very fast. Richard Sterling is holding a press conference in 20 minutes. His lawyers are already filing defamation suits, and my sources say Atlas Security has been activated for crisis management, which is corporate speak for making problems disappear." She paused. "I need you both in federal custody tonight, protective custody, not arrest. But you need to be somewhere Atlas can't reach you." Ethan looked at Harper, who was drawing at the kitchen table, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. "What about my daughter? Bring her. We have family facilities. She'll be safe with you." "For how long?" "Until we can guarantee Richard Sterling won't hurt you to protect himself. Which means until he's arrested, arraigned, and locked up where he can't give orders." Hayes's voice hardened. "I've been working this case for 18 months, Mr. Brooks. I want him in prison almost as much as you do, but I need you alive to testify." Harper looked up from her drawing. "Daddy, who's on the phone?" "Friend from work, baby, keep drawing." She returned to her paper, sketching what looked like flowers and stars and something that might have been a heart. "Okay," Ethan told Hayes. "We'll come in. But I need guarantees, written guarantees that Harper stays with me, that she's protected, that—" "You'll have them. I'm sending a car. 15 minutes. Pack what you need for a few days." The call ended. Ethan looked at Claire. "We're going into protective custody." She nodded, already moving. "I'll pack." Ethan went to Harper, knelt down beside her chair so they were eye level. "Hey, baby, we're going to take a little trip. Stay somewhere safe for a few days." Harper's eyes went wide. "Because of the bad guys?" "Yeah, because of the bad guys." "Are we running away?" "No, we're being smart. There's a difference." She studied his face with the intensity children bring to determining whether adults are telling the truth. "Okay, can I bring my stuffed animals?" "Bring whatever you want that fits in your backpack." Harper ran to pack. Ethan threw clothes into a duffel bag, underwear, socks, 3 days' worth of basics. He grabbed Emma's photo from his nightstand, the one he'd kept next to his bed for 3 years. Then he grabbed Harper's heart medication from the bathroom cabinet, the pills that kept her stable until they could find a donor, until they could afford surgery, until life decided to give them a break instead of another catastrophe. Richard Sterling's press conference started while they were packing. Ethan pulled it up on his phone, morbidly unable to look away. Richard stood outside Atlas headquarters, surrounded by lawyers and cameras, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of wounded dignity. "These allegations are completely false. My daughter Claire is a troubled young woman who has struggled with mental health issues for years. We've tried to get her help, but she's refused treatment. Now she's fabricated these outrageous lies with the help of opportunists who see a chance to profit from attacking a successful company." He paused, letting the words sink in. The cameras loved him. He had the kind of face that inspired trust. "We will vigorously defend ourselves against these baseless accusations. We will pursue legal action against everyone involved in this malicious campaign. And we will prove in court if necessary that Atlas Industries has always operated with the highest standards of environmental responsibility and corporate ethics." Ethan's phone almost cracked in his grip. Claire appeared in the doorway, watching over his shoulder. "He's scared," she said quietly. "He's performing." "No. Look at his eyes. Behind the words, he's terrified." Ethan looked closer, saw the muscle working in Richard's jaw, the way his hands gripped the podium a fraction too tight, the flash of something that might have been rage beneath the professional concern. "Good," Ethan said. "He should be." A knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. Ethan checked the peephole and saw 2 federal agents in dark suits, badges visible. "Mr. Brooks, Agent Hayes sent us." He opened the door. The agents were young, competent-looking, with the kind of alertness that suggested they took their job seriously. "We need to move quickly. Atlas has eyes everywhere, and they know where you live." Harper appeared with her backpack, stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. She looked at the agents with wide eyes. "Are you the good guys?" The female agent smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. We're the good guys." "Okay, but if you're lying, my daddy will know. He's really good at knowing when people lie." They took the service elevator to the basement garage where an unmarked sedan waited. The agents drove with practiced efficiency, taking turns that suggested they were checking for tails. Harper sat between Ethan and Claire in the back seat, clutching her rabbit and asking periodic questions about where they were going and whether there would be TV. The federal building was downtown, concrete and glass and the architectural personality of a filing cabinet. They entered through an underground garage, took a freight elevator to the 3rd floor, and were ushered into a conference room that looked designed to be as neutral and unthreatening as possible. Agent Rachel Hayes was waiting. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that suggested she'd earned her position through competence rather than politics. "Mr. Brooks, Miss Sterling." She shook their hands, then looked down at Harper. "And you must be Harper." "That's me." Harper held up her rabbit. "This is Mr. Hops. He's brave, but he's scared of loud noises." "Then we'll make sure to be quiet." Hayes gestured to the table. "Please sit. We have a lot to discuss." The interview lasted 3 hours. Hayes asked questions with surgical precision, building a timeline, establishing facts, creating a record that could be used in court. She asked about the hard drive, about Atlas's corporate structure, about every document Claire had accessed and every file Ethan had researched. She asked about Emma. Ethan told her everything. The headaches that started in March 2021. The seizures 6 months later. The diagnosis that came too late because Emma had been insured through his job, and the insurance company fought every test and every scan and every treatment until there was nothing left to fight for. "I watched her die for 11 months, Ethan heard himself say. Watched her get smaller and frailer and more terrified every day. She tried to be brave for Harper, tried to pretend it was going to be okay even when we both knew it wasn't." His voice broke. Claire's hand found his under the table. "She died thinking it was just bad luck, just cells turning against themselves. She never knew someone had chosen this for her." Hayes was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost some of its professional distance. "I'm sorry. For what it's worth, what you're doing, what you've both done, it matters. It might not bring your wife back, but it could save the next person who would have died if Richard Sterling kept operating. When can you arrest him?" "We're presenting to a grand jury tomorrow morning. Federal prosecutor is asking for indictments on 43 counts of negligent homicide, conspiracy, RICO violations, obstruction of justice." She pulled out a file. "But we need your testimony, both of you, on the record, Official statements that can be used in court. What about Harper? She stays with you. We have family quarters, safe, comfortable, guards outside. You'll be here until Richard Sterling is in custody, and we can guarantee he won't retaliate. How long? Best case, 3 days. Worst case, 2 weeks. Ethan looked at Harper, who had fallen asleep in her chair with her head on the table, rabbit clutched to her chest. 7 years old and already living through things no child should experience. Okay, we'll do it. Whatever you need. Good. Hayes stood. I'll have someone show you to your quarters. Get some rest. Tomorrow morning we start building the case that puts Richard Sterling in prison for the rest of his life. The family quarters were surprisingly decent. 2 bedrooms connected by a shared living area, bathroom with actual shower pressure, small kitchen stocked with basic groceries. Ethan carried Harper to one of the beds without waking her, pulled off her shoes, covered her with a blanket. He stood in the doorway watching her sleep and felt the weight of everything they'd set in motion pressing down on his shoulders. Claire appeared beside him. She's beautiful. She has your eyes. She has her mother's heart, literally and figuratively. Ethan touched the doorframe. What if this goes wrong? What if Richard walks and we've just painted a target on Harper's back for nothing? Then we run, we disappear, we start over somewhere he can't find us. You say that like it's simple. It's not simple, but it's possible. Claire looked at Harper sleeping. She's lucky to have you, a father who'd risk everything to do the right thing. I don't feel lucky. I feel terrified. Brave people usually do. They stood there in silence, watching a 7-year-old sleep while somewhere in the city, Richard Sterling was probably strategizing with lawyers about how to destroy them. Somewhere, protesters were marching. Somewhere, Sarah Thompson was probably already working on follow-up stories. Somewhere, the machinery of justice was grinding slowly forward. Ethan's phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Campbell. Saw the news. Proud of you. Stay safe. Then another text. Unknown number. Just 3 words. She's very brave. The number resolved itself in Ethan's mind. Richard Sterling. Somehow he'd gotten Ethan's personal cell. Somehow he was reaching through protective custody to remind them that walls and guards and federal agents couldn't protect them from a man with unlimited resources and absolute conviction that he was untouchable. Ethan showed Claire. She went pale. He's telling us he can reach Harper anytime he wants. Or he's bluffing, trying to scare us into backing down. It's working. Ethan deleted the text, blocked the number. It wouldn't matter. Richard Sterling had more numbers, more ways to reach them, more tools in an arsenal built over 30 years of wielding power without conscience. But he also had something Richard didn't. Witnesses, evidence, a journalist who believed them, an FBI agent who wanted justice, and a 7-year-old daughter who'd told him bad guys win when good guys give up. Ethan closed Harper's door quietly and turned to Claire. Tomorrow we give them everything. Every file, every document, every piece of evidence you have. We bury Richard Sterling so deep in proof that his lawyers can't dig him out. And if it's not enough, then we make it enough. Ethan pulled out his phone. Agent Hayes said she needed testimony. Let's give her testimony she can't ignore. They spent the next 4 hours preparing, writing out timelines, organizing evidence, building a narrative that would make sense to a grand jury. They worked until exhaustion made the words blur, until Ethan's eyes burned and Claire was swaying in her chair. At 2 a.m., Ethan finally convinced her to sleep. She disappeared into the second bedroom. Ethan stood alone in the quiet apartment, listening to Harper's soft breathing from behind her door, and allowed himself to think about what came next. Trial. Testimony. Months of legal warfare against a man who could afford the best defense money could buy. Months of living in fear that every stranger on the street might be Atlas security. Months of watching Harper grow up in protective custody because her father had chosen justice over safety. But also, the possibility that Richard Sterling would face consequences. That the 43 people who died would be acknowledged, that Emma's death would mean something beyond just grief. Ethan pulled out the photo he'd packed, Emma smiling at the camera taken the summer before she got sick, when life was simpler and he'd taken for granted that she'd always be there. When the future stretched out indefinitely and death was something that happened to other people. "I'm doing this for you," he whispered to the photo, "for all of them, but mostly for Harper, so she grows up knowing her father was the kind of man who did the right thing even when it cost everything." The photo didn't answer, but somewhere in the silence, Ethan felt something settle. Not peace exactly, but purpose, direction, the certainty that the path he'd chosen, however difficult, was the only one he could live with. Tomorrow they'd start building the case. Tomorrow Richard Sterling would learn what it meant to be held accountable. Tomorrow the machinery of justice would finally turn its attention to a man who'd spent decades believing he was beyond its reach. Tonight, Ethan stood watch over his sleeping daughter and made promises to a dead woman about bringing her killers to justice. It would have to be enough. The grand jury returned indictments on a Friday morning. Ethan and Claire were still in protective custody when Agent Hayes brought the news, carrying coffee and actual relief in her expression for the first time since they'd met. Richard Sterling, 6 senior executives, 3 board members, 43 counts of negligent homicide to start, conspiracy, RICO violations, securities fraud, obstruction of justice. She set the coffee down like she was laying out evidence. "Federal prosecutor says it's the strongest case she's seen in 20 years. Harper looked up from her coloring book. Crayon paused mid-stroke. "Does that mean the bad guy got caught?" "It means we're getting close, sweetheart." Ethan felt something unclench in his chest. Not relief exactly. Richard Sterling indicted wasn't the same as Richard Sterling convicted. But progress, movement, the first real sign that the system might actually work. When does he get arrested? His lawyers are negotiating surrender terms. They want to control the optics, turn himself in rather than get perp walked out of his mansion on live television. Hayes pulled out a folder. "But that's not why I'm here. We found another witness, someone who worked for Atlas directly and is willing to testify." She slid a photo across the table. Black man in his 50s, weathered face, kind eyes that suggested he'd seen things he wished he hadn't. "Marcus Johnson, former truck driver for Atlas Waste Management subsidiary. He was the one who actually dumped the contaminated barrels into reservoir systems." Hayes tapped the photo. "He refused to continue after 3 runs, got fired the next day. He has photos of the barrels, GPS logs, text messages from his supervisor. Everything we need to prove operational knowledge and intent." Ethan stared at the photo. This man had driven the trucks that poisoned the water that killed Emma. This man had literally delivered death to his wife. And then he'd refused to continue. Why is he coming forward now? Because he saw Sarah Thompson's article and couldn't sleep anymore. He's got kids, grandkids. He said he needed to make it right before he died, knowing what he'd done. Hayes closed the folder. "He's meeting us this afternoon. I thought you might want to be there." Ethan looked at Claire. She nodded. "Yeah, I want to meet him." Marcus Johnson arrived at the federal building at 3 p.m., escorted by 2 agents who looked like they'd been instructed to guard him with their lives. He was tall, broad-shouldered, carrying himself with the careful dignity of someone who'd spent years doing hard labor and knew his worth wasn't measured by his paycheck. Agent Hayes made introductions in a conference room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. "Mr. Johnson, this is Ethan Brooks and Claire Sterling. They're the ones who brought the Atlas case to our attention." Marcus looked at Ethan with eyes that held recognition and grief in equal measure. "Your wife, Emma Brooks. I read about her in the article." His voice was rough, like sandpaper on wood. "I'm sorry for your loss." Ethan's throat tightened. "You drove the trucks. 3 runs, March, April, May of 2020. Reservoirs serving 7 different municipal water systems. They told me it was standard waste disposal, that everything was EPA approved." Marcus sat down heavily. but the barrels had skull and crossbones labels, and my supervisor kept saying to only drive at night when nobody was watching. I'm not a stupid man, Mr. Brooks. I knew something was wrong. But you did it anyway. I did it twice before my conscience caught up to my paycheck. The third time I took pictures, documented everything, then I told my supervisor I couldn't do it anymore. Marcus pulled out his phone, swiped through photos, barrels stacked in truck beds, GPS coordinates, text messages that were damning in their casual evil. Night run only, no witnesses, dispose per plan. They fired me the next day, told me if I talked to anyone about what I'd done, they'd make sure I never worked again, that my kids would suffer, that accidents happen to people who don't know when to keep quiet. Ethan studied this man who'd poisoned his wife and then found the courage to stop, who'd been threatened into silence and stayed silent until the weight of it broke him. Why come forward now? Because I saw your daughter on the news, that little girl drawing pictures talking about her mama dying, and I thought about my own grandkids drinking water from those reservoirs. Marcus's voice cracked. I'm not proud of what I did, but I can't undo it. All I can do is make sure people know what happened and who ordered it. Claire leaned forward. You're willing to testify? In court, in front of my father? Ma'am, I'm willing to testify in front of God himself if it means those people get justice. Your father didn't drive those trucks, but he's the one who ordered it, and he needs to pay for that. Agent Hayes pulled out a recording device. Then let's make it official. Marcus's testimony took 4 hours. Every detail documented, every date confirmed, every piece of evidence cataloged and verified. When he finished, the case against Richard Sterling had gone from strong to overwhelming. Ethan walked Marcus out afterward. They stood in the parking garage while federal agents maintained a perimeter and fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I don't forgive you, Ethan heard himself say, for what you did, for the part you played. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm offering truth. It's all I've got left. You stopped. After 3 runs you stopped. That took courage. It took fear. Fear of what I was becoming. Fear of looking my kids in the eye, knowing what I'd done. Marcus met Ethan's gaze. But I appreciate you saying it. They shook hands. 2 black men on opposite sides of corporate murder, finding something approaching understanding in a parking garage that smelled like exhaust and regret. Your daughter, Marcus said quietly. Harper, she looks like a fighter. She is. Then she'll be okay. Kids are tougher than we think, especially when they've got a father who does the right thing even when it costs everything. Marcus left. Ethan stood in the garage and thought about courage and complicity and the thin line between them, about how easy it was to keep your head down and collect your paycheck, about how hard it was to stand up and say no, about how Marcus had done both and was trying to make the second choice mean more than the first. Richard Sterling surrendered 3 days later. His lawyers had negotiated the terms. Monday morning, federal courthouse, private entrance to avoid the cameras and protesters who'd been camped outside Atlas headquarters since Sarah Thompson's article dropped. But someone leaked the time and location. By 8 a.m., the courthouse steps were packed with victim families holding photos of their dead. Signs reading "Justice for the 43" and "Corporate murder is still murder." News cameras everywhere, capturing every angle. Ethan watched it on television from protective custody. Richard arriving in a black SUV flanked by lawyers who looked like they charged $1,000 an hour. Walking through a gauntlet of angry citizens who shouted questions and accusations and grief. Richard's face was carefully neutral, professional, the expression of a man who'd been in difficult situations before and knew how to perform confidence, even when the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. But Ethan saw it, the flicker of something behind the mask, fear, maybe, or rage that this was happening to him when he'd spent 30 years believing he was untouchable. The arraignment lasted 20 minutes. Bail set at $10 million, which Richard's lawyers paid immediately. Electronic monitoring, surrender of passport, restricted travel. He walked out of that courthouse a free man pending trial, and the protesters screamed themselves hoarse. Agent Hayes came by that evening with updates and takeout Chinese food. Trial date is set for 6 weeks from now. Federal prosecutor wants to move fast before Richard's team can bury us in motions and delays. She passed out containers of lo mein. You'll both testify, probably for multiple days. Defense is going to come at you hard. How hard? They'll try to discredit Claire. Mental health history, troubled relationship with her father, financial motivations. They'll try to paint you as a grieving man who latched on to conspiracy theories because accepting randomness is harder than accepting blame. Ethan stabbed his fork into noodles. And the evidence? They'll claim documents were fabricated, emails were taken out of context, chemical analyses are inconclusive. Richard's team is very good at creating reasonable doubt. Hayes paused. But we have Marcus Johnson. We have 43 victims whose deaths all point to the same source. We have internal documents that are going to be very hard to explain away. You think we'll win? I think we have a strong case. Whether a jury convicts is anyone's guess. She looked at Harper, who was building a fort out of couch cushions in the corner. But I think you're doing the right thing. And sometimes that has to be enough. The next 6 weeks passed in a strange, suspended reality. Days in protective custody, reviewing evidence, preparing testimony, living in rooms that were safe but not home. Harper went to a small private school under an assumed name, escorted by federal agents who tried to look less intimidating for the sake of a 7-year-old. She adapted with the resilience children have when adults give them no other choice. Made friends with the kids in her class. Drew pictures of federal agents and called them her bodyguards. Asked questions about the trial with the directness of someone who'd learned that honesty was the only currency that mattered. Is the bad guy going to jail? We're trying to make that happen, baby. But you don't know for sure? No, I don't know for sure. She thought about that while coloring a picture of what looked like a courtroom. That's scary, not knowing. Yeah, it is. But you're doing it anyway, because some things are worth being scared for. Harper nodded like this made perfect sense. Then she went back to her drawing, adding purple flowers to the margins because Emma had loved purple and Harper had decided that meant purple was for brave things. The trial began on a Tuesday in November. Federal courthouse downtown, courtroom packed with victim families and journalists, and people who'd followed the story from Sarah Thompson's first article through 6 weeks of pretrial motions and media coverage. Richard Sterling sat at the defense table in a perfectly tailored suit, flanked by 4 attorneys who looked like they specialized in making impossible things disappear. He looked calm, confident, like a man who'd been in difficult negotiations before and knew how to win. The prosecution's case took 3 weeks. Expert witnesses on water contamination. Chemical engineers explaining how Atlas's waste matched the toxic compounds found in 7 municipal systems. Epidemiologists showing cancer cluster maps that lit up like Christmas trees in every city where Atlas had operated. Then the victims. Jennifer Morrison testified on day 12. Her son Caleb had died 3 weeks before his MIT graduation. Brain tumor that appeared out of nowhere and spread faster than treatment could touch. She brought his high school photo, his acceptance letter, the scholarship notification that had made them both cry with joy. He was going to be an engineer. He wanted to design clean water systems for developing countries. He wanted to use his education to help people. Her voice broke. And instead he died because someone decided saving money on waste disposal was more important than his life. 8 more families followed, each one bringing photos and memories and the specific weight of grief that came from losing someone to preventable death, each one looking directly at Richard Sterling and daring him to maintain his composure while they described watching their children, their spouses, their parents die. Marcus Johnson testified on day 15. He walked to the witness stand with the careful dignity of someone who knew he was about to confess to crimes that made him complicit in murder. The prosecutor took him through his employment history, his duties, the 3 runs he'd made dumping contaminated waste into water systems. "Mr. Johnson, did you know what you were dumping was toxic?" "Yes, ma'am. The barrels had warning labels, skull and crossbones, chemical hazard symbols. I'd have to be blind to miss them." "And did you know you were dumping them into water supplies that served residential areas?" "I suspected. The GPS coordinates my supervisor gave me were all near reservoirs, and he kept telling me to only drive at night to avoid being seen." Marcus paused. "I'm not proud of what I did, but I did it, and people died because of it." The defense attorney rose for cross-examination. Expensive suit, shark eyes, the kind of lawyer who made a career out of destroying witnesses. "Mr. Johnson, you were fired from Atlas for poor performance, correct?" "I was fired for refusing to continue illegal dumping." "That's your characterization. Atlas's records show you were terminated for cause after multiple performance issues." "Then Atlas's records are lying. Or you're lying now, seeking revenge against a company that legitimately terminated your employment." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I took pictures. I kept GPS logs. I saved text messages from my supervisor. If I was making this up for revenge, I wouldn't have evidence." The prosecutor presented the evidence. Photos time-stamped and geotagged. Text messages that were damning in their casual cruelty. GPS coordinates that matched reservoir locations exactly. The defense attorney tried to create doubt. Maybe the photos were doctored, maybe the texts were taken out of context. But Marcus held steady, answered every question with the certainty of someone who'd decided truth was worth whatever price he had to pay. When he stepped down, he walked past Richard Sterling's table. Richard didn't look at him, just stared straight ahead with the blank expression of someone who'd learned long ago that showing emotion was weakness. Claire testified on day 18. Ethan sat in the gallery watching her walk to the witness stand. She wore a simple gray suit, hair pulled back, no jewelry except the small gold necklace that had been her mother's. She looked young and terrified and absolutely certain. The prosecutor walked her through her background. Daughter of Richard Sterling, access to Atlas's private servers, 6 months spent verifying evidence before coming forward. "Miss Sterling, why did you decide to expose your father's crimes?" Claire looked directly at the jury. "Because 43 people are dead. Because my father ordered their deaths as casually as you'd order coffee. Because someone had to stop him." "You understand that doing so cost you your relationship with your family, your inheritance, potentially your freedom if this court decided you were complicit." "I understand. But some things matter more than money or comfort or family loyalty." She paused. "Justice matters more. Truth matters more. Those 43 people mattered more." The prosecutor presented the evidence Claire had provided. Internal memos with Richard's signature. Email chains discussing cost-benefit analyses where human lives were treated as acceptable losses. Chemical reports that had been falsified before submission to regulatory agencies. "Did your father know about the contamination scheme?" "He ordered it. I have emails where he explicitly approved the disposal plan, where he calculated that settlement costs would be less than proper waste management." Claire pulled out a document. "This memo, dated January 2019, is from my father to his chief operating officer. It says, and I quote, 'Ashford's strategy proved cost-effective. Implement similar approach in 6 additional markets. Ensure legal protocols for damage control.'" The prosecutor projected the memo on screens throughout the courtroom. Richard's signature clear at the bottom. And what did Ashford's strategy refer to? The deliberate contamination of Ashford's water supply in 2019. 3 people died, 47 got sick. Atlas settled for $15 million and made everyone sign NDAs. Claire met the jury's eyes. "My father saw that people would die, that others would get sick, that families would be destroyed, and he decided to do it 6 more times because the math worked in his favor." Cross-examination was brutal. The defense attorney spent 3 hours trying to break her. questioned her mental health history, depression after her mother's death, anxiety, therapy sessions that had been documented and could now be weaponized, suggested financial motivations. She'd inherit nothing now, maybe she was bitter, implied she'd fabricated evidence to hurt a father she resented. Claire took it all, answered every question with calm precision. When the attorney suggested she was delusional, she produced more documents. When he claimed she'd taken emails out of context, she provided the full chains showing context made it worse, not better. "Miss Sterling, isn't it true that you and your father had a contentious relationship?" "We had a complicated relationship, but that doesn't change what he did." "You loved him once, didn't you?" Claire's composure cracked for just a second. "I loved who I thought he was. Then I found out who he actually was, and I couldn't love that person anymore. So this is revenge. This is accountability. There's a difference." When Claire stepped down, she walked past her father's table. Richard looked at her then, actually met her eyes. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or the death of whatever relationship they'd once had. Claire didn't flinch, just walked to the gallery and sat next to Ethan, hands shaking in her lap. He reached over and took her hand. "You did good. I destroyed my father. You told the truth. He destroyed himself." Ethan testified on day 20. He'd been dreading this, preparing for weeks, rehearsing answers, but nothing could really prepare someone for sitting in a witness box while lawyers tried to discredit your dead wife's memory. The prosecutor took him through Emma's illness, timeline of symptoms, progression of cancer, treatments that failed, death that came too fast and too cruel. "Mr. Brooks, did your wife know she'd been poisoned?" "No. She died thinking it was random. Just bad luck. Just cells that turned against her for no reason." His voice cracked. "She never knew someone had decided her life was worth less than a profit margin." "How has her death affected your family?" Ethan looked at Harper sitting in the gallery between two federal agents, 7 years old and trying to understand why people were talking about her mama dying. "My daughter grew up without a mother. She has a heart condition that we can barely afford to treat. She's lived in fear for the past 2 months because we're fighting people who have unlimited resources and no conscience." He turned to the jury. "Oh, but she's also learned that doing the right thing matters. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're terrified. That's what Emma would have wanted her to learn." The defense attorney rose. Ethan braced himself. "Mr. Brooks, you were fired from Northridge Manufacturing, correct?" "I was laid off after Atlas Industries acquired the company." "Because you were underperforming?" "Because I reported safety violations and became inconvenient." "That's your interpretation. Isn't it possible you were simply let go as part of standard corporate restructuring?" Ethan held the attorney's gaze. 17 incident reports in 12 months. All flagging safety violations. All ignored. Then Atlas bought Northridge and suddenly I was redundant. You tell me if that's coincidence. You're unemployed, desperate, struggling to pay for your daughter's medical care. Yes. And then Miss Sterling appeared offering money and a conspiracy theory that explained your wife's death as something other than tragic randomness. Claire didn't offer me money. She offered me truth. How convenient that this truth also made you a victim instead of just an unfortunate man whose wife got cancer. Ethan felt anger flash hot in his chest. My wife didn't just get cancer. She was poisoned. The chemical signatures match. The timeline matches. 43 other people in 7 different cities all got sick the same way after Atlas contaminated their water. That's not coincidence. That's murder. Can you prove causation? Can you prove definitively that your wife's cancer was caused by water contamination and not by any of the thousands of other carcinogens people encounter daily? The experts can prove it. The chemical analyses prove it. Marcus Johnson's testimony proves it. But you personally cannot prove it. You're a grieving man who latched onto a conspiracy because accepting that sometimes bad things just happen is harder than accepting that someone is to blame." The words hit like a punch. Ethan's hands clenched on the armrests. "You're right that I'm grieving. I'll grieve my wife until the day I die, but I'm not delusional. I'm not making this up. I'm not some desperate man who can't accept randomness." His voice rose. "I'm a father who wants his daughter to grow up knowing her mother's death meant something. That it wasn't just accepted as the cost of doing business. That powerful people faced consequences for treating human lives as acceptable losses. So you admit this is about meaning. About making your wife's death serve a narrative. This is about justice. About making sure no one else has to watch someone they love die because a corporation decided profit mattered more than people." The attorney tried to push further, but Ethan held firm, answered every question with the conviction of someone who'd spent 6 weeks preparing to defend truth against lawyers whose job was to obscure it. When he stepped down, his hands were shaking and his shirt was damp with sweat. But he'd said what needed saying. Defended Emma's memory, stood up to people who wanted to reduce her death to unfortunate coincidence. He returned to the gallery. Harper climbed into his lap despite the federal agent's protests. "You were brave, Daddy." "I was scared. That's what makes it brave." The prosecution rested on day 21. The defense presented their case over the next week. Expert witnesses claiming the chemical analyses were inconclusive. Corporate witnesses testifying that Richard Sterling trusted his subordinates and couldn't be held responsible for operational decisions. Character witnesses describing Richard as a devoted father and community leader who'd built a company that employed thousands. They called Claire's former therapist, who testified about her depression and anxiety. Called former Northridge employees who said Ethan had been difficult to work with. Called scientists who suggested that cancer causation was too complex to definitively link to a single environmental factor. But they couldn't explain away the internal memos, couldn't justify the cost-benefit analyses that treated human deaths as acceptable losses. Couldn't account for Marcus Johnson's testimony and evidence. Closing arguments happened on a Friday. The prosecutor went first, walking the jury through 3 weeks of evidence with methodical precision. Richard Sterling knew. He approved, he profited. 43 people died because he decided their lives were worth less than the cost of proper waste disposal. This isn't a tragedy. It's not an unfortunate accident. It's murder dressed up in corporate language and justified by spreadsheets. She pointed at the photos of victims that had been displayed throughout the trial. 43 faces, children, parents, grandparents. People who'd trusted that the water coming from their taps was safe because that's how civilizations work. The defense wants you to believe this is about a troubled daughter seeking revenge and a grieving man grasping at conspiracy theories. But the evidence speaks for itself. Internal documents, chemical analyses, witness testimony from someone who actually drove the trucks and dumped the waste. This isn't conspiracy. This is fact. The defense attorney took his turn, smooth polished, creating doubt with the skill of someone who'd spent decades making juries question what they knew to be true. The prosecution has presented a compelling narrative, but narrative isn't evidence. Correlation isn't causation. Grieving families deserve answers, but that doesn't mean we can convict a man based on coincidence and interpretation. He walked through the defense's case, questioned the reliability of witnesses with obvious biases, suggested that Claire's mental health made her an unreliable narrator, implied that Ethan's desperation had made him vulnerable to manipulation. Richard Sterling is not a perfect man, but he's not a murderer. He's a businessman who trusted his employees to follow regulations, who made decisions based on information provided by experts, who built a company that created jobs and contributed to communities. The attorney paused at Richard's table, placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't let tragedy become injustice. Don't convict a man because the prosecution needs someone to blame for deaths that were tragic but not criminal. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Ethan and Claire waited in protective custody, trying to distract themselves and failing. Harper drew pictures, courtrooms, and judges in something that looked like a scale with hearts on one side and money on the other. "What's that, baby?" "Justice. Ms. Claire says justice is when you make things fair again, even when you can't make them better." Ethan looked at Claire. She shrugged. "She asked what we were doing. I tried to explain in 7-year-old terms. And she understood better than most adults." On the third day, Agent Hayes called. "Jury's reached a verdict. Court reconvenes in 2 hours." They drove to the courthouse in an unmarked vehicle, federal agents running interference through crowds of protesters and journalists who'd been camped outside for 3 days. The courtroom was packed, victim families in the front rows, media in the back. Every seat filled with people who'd been following this case from Sarah Thompson's first article through 6 weeks of trial. Richard Sterling sat at the defense table looking calm, controlled, like a man who'd spent 30 years winning and saw no reason to believe this time would be different. The jury filed in. 12 faces unreadable, the judge took her seat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit negligent homicide, how do you find?" "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Victim families crying, reporters rushing for exits to file stories. The judge's gavel slamming for order. "On 43 counts of negligent homicide, how do you find?" "Guilty on all counts." Richard Sterling's face went pale. His lawyer started talking urgently, but he just sat there looking like someone who'd been told the rules had changed and no one had consulted him first. The judge continued through the remaining charges: conspiracy, RICO violations, obstruction of justice, securities fraud. Guilty, 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 guilty. When it was done, when all the verdicts had been read and recorded, the judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Richard was led away in handcuffs. He looked at Claire as the bailiffs escorted him past the gallery. She met his eyes without flinching. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "I'm sorry you made choices that led here." Richard didn't respond, just kept walking, shoulders straight, refusing to bow even as his world collapsed. Outside the courthouse, victim families gathered on the steps. Jennifer Morrison held her son's photo and cried while journalists asked how she felt. Other families embraced, mourning and celebrating in equal measure. Ethan stood with Harper and Claire, watching justice manifest in real time. A reporter approached. "Mr. Brooks, how does it feel to have won?" Ethan looked at Harper, at the daughter who'd grown up without a mother, at Claire who'd sacrificed everything to stop her father, at the families surrounding them who'd lost people they loved, to decisions made in boardrooms by men who'd never had to face consequences. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like accountability. There's a difference. What happens now? Now we rebuild. We figure out what comes next for families who lost someone. We make sure this doesn't happen again. He paused. And we try to teach our children that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs everything. The reporter moved on to other victims. Ethan, Claire, and Harper walked to the federal vehicle waiting at the curb. "Can we go home now?" Harper asked. "Soon, baby. After sentencing. After we're sure it's safe." "Will it ever be safe?" The question hung in the air. Richard Sterling had been convicted, but he had allies. People who'd profited from his schemes and had reasons to want witnesses silenced. The fight wasn't over just because a jury had returned a verdict, but Ethan looked at his daughter, 7 years old and already understanding that safety was something you worked for, not something you assumed, and made a choice. "We'll make it safe, whatever it takes." Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Same courtroom, same families, but the energy had shifted. This wasn't about proving guilt anymore. It was about assigning cost to consequences. The judge had reviewed victim impact statements. 43 families who'd submitted letters describing what they'd lost, who'd put into words the specific weight of grief that came from preventable death. Jennifer Morrison spoke in court, stood before the judge and described watching her son die 3 weeks before his college graduation. Described the future he'd been planning: engineering degree, plans to design clean water systems for developing countries, a life dedicated to helping people. Described how Atlas Industries had stolen all of that for a profit margin. Other families followed, each one bringing their dead to life through testimony, each one looking at Richard Sterling and demanding he see them as human beings whose lives mattered. Ethan spoke last. "My daughter Harper is 7 years old. She has a heart condition that we're still fighting to treat. She grew up without a mother because Richard Sterling decided saving money on waste disposal was more important than human lives." He looked at Richard. "She asks me sometimes if I'm sad about her mama, and I tell her yes, I'm sad. But I also tell her that sadness doesn't mean doing nothing. It means fighting to make sure no one else has to feel this way." He turned to the judge. "Whatever sentence you give, it won't bring Emma back. It won't undo the suffering of 43 families, but it will tell my daughter that justice is real, that powerful people aren't above the law, that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard." His voice strengthened. "That's what Emma would have wanted Harper to learn. That integrity isn't negotiable, that you don't sell your soul for comfort, that you stand up for truth even when the cost is everything." The judge listened to every statement, reviewed the evidence, considered the guidelines and the gravity of systematic corporate negligence that had resulted in 43 deaths. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd presided over difficult cases but had never seen anything quite like this. "Richard Sterling, you were given power, wealth, and opportunity. You could have used those gifts to improve lives, to build something meaningful, to contribute to society in ways that mattered. Instead, you used them to poison innocent people for profit. You prioritized quarterly earnings over human lives. You treated other people's children, other people's spouses as acceptable losses in pursuit of wealth you didn't even need." She paused. "You showed no remorse throughout this trial, no acknowledgement of harm, no recognition that the decisions you made had consequences for real people with real families who loved them. That absence of humanity is perhaps more disturbing than the crimes themselves." Richard stood, flanked by lawyers, face carefully neutral. "I hereby sentence you to 43 consecutive life sentences, one for each person whose death you caused. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $2.3 billion in restitution to victims' families and environmental remediation funds. You will spend the remainder of your life in federal prison." The gavel fell. Richard Sterling was led away. No longer a CEO or a billionaire or a man who could make problems disappear. Just a convict in handcuffs who'd finally run out of ways to buy immunity from consequences. The 6 executives received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. Board members got lighter terms but would spend the rest of their lives labeled as accomplices to mass murder. Atlas Industries declared bankruptcy that afternoon. Assets liquidated, sold to competitors, broken into pieces and scattered. The empire Richard had built over 30 years dismantled in hours. The settlement money, $2.3 billion divided among victims and environmental cleanup, started distributing 3 months later. Each family received compensation based on loss, medical expenses, suffering. Not enough to replace who they'd lost, but enough to acknowledge that those lives had value. Emma's portion came to $1.2 million. Ethan put it in trust for Harper's education and medical care. Used part of it to establish the Emma Brooks Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to monitoring water quality and supporting victims of environmental negligence. Claire liquidated what remained of her mother's trust fund and donated it to the foundation. $12 million that Margaret Sterling had hidden from her husband, money that would now undo some of the harm he'd caused. They named it the Margaret and Emma Fund. 2 mothers who died because of Richard Sterling's greed, now having their names attached to something that would prevent future deaths. Harper's heart transplant came 6 months after the trial. A donor was found, an 8-year-old girl killed in a car accident whose parents had signed organ donor forms and gave Harper a chance at life. The surgery took 7 hours. Ethan sat in the waiting room with Claire, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore but needed to believe in right now. Praying that Harper would survive, that the new heart would work, that he wouldn't lose the only piece of Emma he had left. When the surgeon emerged, Ethan couldn't read his expression. "She's stable, the heart is strong, she'll need monitoring, but the prognosis is good." Ethan broke down crying for the first time since Emma's funeral. Claire held him while he sobbed, 3 years of grief and fear and rage finally finding release in a hospital waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and second chances. Harper woke up 6 hours later. Groggy from anesthesia, confused about the tubes and monitors, but alive. Fighting. Her eyes found Ethan and she smiled, gap-toothed and brave. "Did it work? You have a new heart, baby. You're going to be okay." "Does it hurt?" "Probably. But you're the bravest person I know. You can handle it." She looked past him at Claire standing in the doorway. "Is Miss Claire staying?" Ethan glanced at Claire. They'd been living in protective custody for 8 months, sharing space, sharing fear, building something that looked remarkably like family in the wreckage of everything they'd lost. "Do you want her to stay?" "Yeah. She makes you smile like Mama's picture." Claire crossed to the bed, took Harper's hand carefully, avoiding the IV lines. "I want to stay, if that's okay with you." "Okay, but you have to call yourself something besides Ms. Claire. That's weird if you're staying forever." Ethan looked at Claire. She looked back. A question passed between them without words. "What should I call myself?" Harper considered this with the seriousness she brought to important decisions. "Mom Claire, because Mama Emma is in heaven, but I can have 2 moms." "Daddy said Mama would want me to be happy even if it's different." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I'd be honored." They stayed at the hospital for 2 weeks while Harper recovered. Ethan slept in a chair next to her bed. Claire brought clothes and food and sat with them reading stories in voices that were getting better with practice. On the 12th day, Harper drew a picture. 3 people holding hands, her in the middle, Ethan on one side, Claire on the other. Above them, a small figure with wings. "That's Mama," Harper explained, pointing at the angel. "She's watching us, making sure we're okay." Ethan studied the drawing. The family they'd become. The mother they'd lost, the future they were building from grief and courage, and the choice to keep fighting even when giving up would have been easier. "I think she'd be proud of you, baby. She'd be proud of you too. You were brave, you fought the bad guys and won. We fought the bad guys, me and Claire and a lot of other people who refused to give up. And Mama helped from heaven." "Yeah, I think she did." They went home, actual home. Not protective custody, 18 months after the trial ended. The apartment felt different, smaller maybe, or just familiar in a way that made Ethan realize how much had changed while the walls stayed the same. Claire had her own place 3 blocks away, but she was at the apartment most nights. Cooking dinner with Harper, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories in voices that had gotten significantly better with practice. One evening, after Harper had gone to bed, Ethan and Claire sat on the fire escape looking at stars that barely showed through the city's light pollution. "I got a job offer," Claire said, "running environmental compliance for a nonprofit. Good salary, meaningful work, chance to use what I know to actually help people instead of just exposing my father's crimes. You going to take it?" "Depends." "On what?" She turned to look at him. "On whether you want me to stay, really stay, not just staying in the city but being part of this, part of Harper's life, part of your life." Ethan thought about the past 18 months, the trial, the terror, the slow rebuilding of something that looked like hope. Thought about Harper calling Claire Mom Claire and drawing pictures of their family. Thought about Emma, who'd told him once that grief wasn't betrayal and that loving again didn't mean forgetting what you'd lost. I want you to stay, not because we need you, though we do, but because we want you, because you're family now, because Harper lights up when you walk in the room and He paused. I love you. Not the same way I loved Emma, but real, important. The kind of love that means I want to build a future with you in it. Claire was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with tears. Say it again, he smiled. Remembered her demanding the same thing from him months ago in a hospital corridor. I love you, Claire Sterling. I love your courage. I love how you read bedtime stories even though you're still terrible at character voices. I love that you chose truth over comfort. I love that Harper feels safe with you. I love that you make me believe family is something we choose, not just something we're born into. She kissed him, soft and certain and tasting like salt from tears that were happy and sad in equal measure. I love you too, both of you. This whole strange, broken, beautiful family we've made from grief and fighting and refusing to give up. They sat on the fire escape until the city lights started to blur, until exhaustion caught up to adrenaline, until the future stopped feeling like threat and started feeling like possibility. Inside, Harper slept peacefully, a 7-year-old with a donor heart and 2 mothers and a father who'd taught her that integrity mattered more than comfort, that courage meant doing right things when they were hard, that bad guys didn't always win if good guys refused to give up. 2 years later, Ethan stood at Emma's grave with Harper and Claire. They brought purple flowers because Emma had loved purple and Harper had decided purple was for brave things. Harper was 9 now, healthy, thriving, carrying a donor heart that had given her a second chance at life. She placed flowers on the headstone with the careful reverence children bring to rituals they don't fully understand, but know matter deeply. Hi, Mama. I brought Mom Claire. She takes care of us. Is that okay? The gravestone didn't answer, but that had never stopped Harper from talking. Daddy runs the foundation now, the one with your name. He says you'd be proud. I got straight A's this semester, and my heart is really strong. The doctors say I'm going to be okay. She stepped back. Claire moved forward, placed her own flowers next to Harper's. I'll take care of them, she said quietly to the stone. I promise. Thank you for loving him first. You raised an incredible man. You made this family possible even if you're not here to see it. Ethan knelt by the grave, touched the marble that was cold despite the spring sunshine. We did it, Emma. Richard Sterling is in prison. 43 families got justice. Harper's healthy, and His voice caught. We're okay, not the way we planned, but okay in a way I think you'd understand. He stood. Claire's hand found his. Harper took his other hand. They stood there together, a man, a woman, and a child who'd found each other in the wreckage of corporate murder and built something that looked like family. Ready to go? Claire asked. Ethan took one last look at Emma's name carved in stone, at the dates that marked a life too short, at the flowers they'd brought because some rituals mattered even when the person who inspired them was gone. Yeah, we're ready. They walked back to the car. Harper ran ahead, talking about the ice cream they'd promised her after the cemetery visit. Claire and Ethan followed, hands linked, building a future one day at a time. Behind them, purple flowers stood bright against marble. A memorial to a woman who died not knowing she'd been murdered, whose death had sparked a fight that brought down an empire and saved countless lives, whose legacy lived on in a daughter who understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, in a foundation that monitored water quality and protected vulnerable communities, in a man who'd chosen integrity over comfort and taught his child that doing right things mattered even when the cost was everything. The sun broke through clouds as they drove away. Harper chattered about flavors, chocolate or strawberry or maybe both. Claire navigated traffic with the confidence of someone who'd finally found where she belonged. Ethan drove and thought about Emma and justice and the long road from grief to something approaching peace. They'd fought, they'd won, They'd built family from ashes. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined 2 years ago, standing in his kitchen holding a bribe he refused to take. But it was enough, more than enough. It was everything that mattered.